Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, the major motion podcast, where we talk about the biggest and best films coming to theaters and streaming online. From the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm John Negroni, film editor for InBetweenDrafts.com, and from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he's a freelance film writer and part-time archaeologist slash adventurer slash heartbreaker. It's Will Ashton.
Howdy.
I have to, yeah, you're wearing the hat. Very nice.
I'm wearing the hat.
Did you get that hat from, Runaway Circus Train adventure where you're trying to foil a bunch of grave robbers?
You know, I'm gonna save the origins of this hat for my own young Will Ashton series that's gonna go on to Disney Plus maybe in a few years. Yeah, I was hoping it would make me feel more like indie, but it makes me feel like I'm doing like a Red Dead Redemption 2 gameplay.
I did not know you even know what Red Dead Redemption 2 is. It's kind of weird to hear those words coming out of your mouth. You, the most not video game person.
Right.
I know.
Well, it's funny because I don't know if you've been listening to Joe Pera's podcast, but he does a whole episode about Red Dead Redemption 2 and how it gave him sanity and peace during the pandemic.
Wow. It gave me sanity and peace during 2018. I'll say that. Yeah, fantastic game. Yeah. One of the greatest games ever made, I would say. That's
what I heard. I have no idea.
Well, Will Ashton, if you and I were roommates, and you would in 2018 no less, you would have been every single day coming out there, and I'd be either playing Red Dead Redemption 2 or Marvel's Spider-Man on PS4, and you would have an idea. You'd have a deeper connection probably.
Yeah,
those are a couple of adventures, right? They're adventurous video games. They're about adventure. How fun. We're going to talk about a movie here, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is its own kind of adventure. And I was thinking about this when I was just kind of thinking, we're going to talk about Indiana Jones, how fun. This is the fifth movie. This is one of the biggest, most prolific franchises that you and I have never talked about on Cinemaholics. Right? Because especially ones with Harrison Ford. We've talked about Star Wars. We've talked about the Fast franchise. We've talked about the Avatar movies at this point. We've talked about it all these Marvel things. You and I have talked about so many movies, so many franchises, but one of the ones with the biggest gaps, but is still a pretty big one, is Indiana Jones. The last one came out in 2008. That was Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It's been 15 years. And we have talked about the 2008 before. What a year for movies, especially in terms of beginnings and endings, right? Because this one Crystal Skull was supposed to be the end, was a little bit disappointing. So I figure for Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny, we just kind of we have to open with it because we haven't really talked about Indiana Jones. We may have briefly mentioned it when we were talking about Uncharted last year. I'm not sure. But I know for me, Indiana Jones, not the most important franchise to me growing up. What about you?
It's interesting, because I feel like I had less of a relationship to Indiana Jones. I did something like the James Bond series or even Star Wars, but I feel like I have a greater swell of emotion when I know there's going to be a new Indiana Jones movie. Really? I don't know if it's just because of the exclusivity of it or just the promise of adventure or what it is, but I love Raiders of the Lost Ark. I think that is one of the best adventure movies out there. It's just top to bottom, great movie. Got to see it on the big screen earlier this year. Had a great time. It was first time seeing that movie in probably well over a decade.
I rewatched it in 2020, I want to say, and it never gets old.
Yeah, it just moves like gangbusters. It's Spielberg just shooting lightning. Great casting on Harrison Ford's part. Just there's so many wonderful things you can say about that movie. I recently revisited the sequels, including Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I will say for the longest time, was not a Temple of Doom guy. I don't know where you stand on Temple of Doom.
It's my problematic fave.
Okay. I think it's not a great movie, but I was more into it this time around. I think I saw more of its virtues and its strengths this time.
I saw it as a kid before Raiders of the Lost Ark, and which is weird. It's like watching Empire Strikes Back first. Although in this case, it's a prequel, right? So it kind of logistically makes sense. Yeah. But you know what? You know what I like about Temple of Doom? Because look, Raiders, it's unimpeachable. And I would say that Last Crusade is more of that.
Yes.
But Temple of Doom is just kind of cool, man. Like,
sure.
It's got some weird things about it. Very, very culturally messed up. But it's just so... Is edgy the wrong word? Like, I just like how its vibe is such a drastic departure. And it feels like a dangerous movie, which I really like. Like, it's going for something a little bit different. And I know a lot of people don't like the love interest in that movie.
Willie Scott.
I think that she's actually I'm glad that she's so different from Marion, and I'm glad she's kind of unlikable. There's something just interesting about it to me. And it's probably just nostalgia, to be honest, because I would imagine people going back to the movie are kind of like, yeah, is this pretty much a pretty big step down, isn't it? But no, I think it's just kind of cool, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know where it's my place to talk about Willie Scott as a man, but I will say I find her to be a inherently pretty misogynistic character.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, no, it's a wonder she married Steven Spielberg.
Well, that's the thing, seeing the movie again after seeing The Fablemans.
Sure.
Like, it's so fascinating to me how much Willie Scott has qualities of Mincy's character or Michelle Williams' character.
We should say Spielberg and George Lucas were both going through divorces when they made Temple of Doom.
Oh, I didn't know Spielberg was, but I didn't know that George Lucas was. And I know he's on record saying I was not in a good mood. And knowing Willie Scott, outside of like the moms in The Village, is like the only real prominent woman character in that movie and how she's depicted, portrayed. I mean, I'm not going to say that she's like, you know, like I do agree that like she has a good spunky energy. I think she plays well against Indiana Jones, and subsequently the actress plays well against Harrison Ford. I do agree with you that it is nice to see a character that's not just like Marianne twice. You know, it's like a little bit different. And I think that's kind of where I stand on Temple of Doom overall, is that like I think it's a movie I respect more than I like. I think it's kind of the sum of its parts. Like I really enjoy the set piece. I like what you're saying, where it's like it's darker, and it's bolder, and it's weirder, and it's meaner than the previous film. It kind of goes for broke. There's some really cool character designs. I love Short Round. He's fantastic.
He's my boy, Kwan Quay, who, look, I'll just say this now because I don't want people to be disappointed. He's not in Dial of Destiny, which is nonsense. Right. I don't understand.
Really surprised he didn't make a cameo. I was kind of holding out hope, especially since he's now working with Disney. Like I know he did that Disney Plus show with also Michelle Yeoh.
They wanted to do it, but it was a scheduling thing because after Everything Everywhere All at Once, they could have easily filmed a quick cameo.
That's what I thought.
It's already a pretty long movie, though, so 2.5 hours.
I mean, you know, in the midst of all this action adventure, Harrison Ford gets a phone call. It's Short Round, being Indy,
I need to get to Morocco. How am I going to get there?
Yeah.
Short Round, what do you got for me? And he's like, now he's the suave, tuxedo James Bond character. Right. And he's like, Andy, it's so great to hear from you. But he's all debonair, right?
Sure, yeah.
Your car will be there in a half an hour. Just kidding, like 2 hours. Like, have some fun. That would have been hilarious. Everyone would have loved it. The whole audience would have screamed.
Well, I mean, if we're going to have like 1,500 action chase scenes in this movie, I think there could have been a fun reversal where, like you said, Short Round's the one in the tuxedo and stuff, and Indy's the driver. And,
Short Round's like, get in, Indy.
Yeah.
Now you're going to listen to me. I rewatched Temple of Doom pretty recently. You know what? Actually, I remember I rewatched it not too long after I rewatched Raiders because I saw it at a drive-in with my now wife and a couple friends. And that was super fun because I had never seen any of the Indiana Jones movies in theaters except for Crystal Skull. But and also, by extension, I had never seen them at a drive-in. And a drive-in is a great experience to watch an Indiana Jones movie. I don't know what you think about that, but it is. It's really, really fun. And Temple of Doom, yeah, it lands in the drive-in experience. Last Crusade's the one I haven't revisited much. I watched the first 30 minutes yesterday because I was kind of like, oh yeah, it's been a long time. And I remember that was like a movie we watched in middle school. I remember, which I think was the first time I ever watched it was in class. But I don't know. I don't know why. I just never thought Raiders of the Lost Ark. I wasn't into those movies. I knew what they were. I watched Raiders for the first time when I was in high school because one of my friends was obsessed with it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's interesting that we kind of grew up in the age of indie imitators because, there's this long gap after Last Crusade where I think they're flirting with making a fourth Indiana Jones before Kingdom Crystal Skull.
There's going to be 5 of them.
Sure.
So originally Spielberg and Lucas were like, oh yeah, they always had 5 in mind. But then after Last Crusade in 1989, they decided, I think specifically Spielberg was like, you know what? I think what should happen next is a young Indiana Jones series, not another movie. Because I feel like the creative juices had run out. They were like, we can't just keep doing the same thing with this character anymore. Like this movie kind of ends it.
Sure. And Harrison Ford's like, why not? I'm still going.
I love this new era for Harrison Ford.
Sure.
Where he's just like, you know what? Those lame movies I used to do, they're all right.
Sure.
They're all right, kid.
They're all right.
But don't get cocky.
Yeah. But I was going to say, like, we kind of grew up in this age of, like, indie imitators. And we had, like, the Mummy movies and we had, like, the National Treasure movies. Mm-hmm. They were kind of picking up the slack for the lack of Indiana Jones
Great
films.
Movies, though. Big hits. And I would say, yeah, Mummy was the one I was like, that was a must see. I couldn't. That was one of my first like big action adventure movies I got to see in theaters. The Mummy, and of course, my favorite movie of all time, The Mask of Zorro.
Sure, yeah.
Which, you know, obviously it's deriving a huge legacy from the Zorro movies of a whole century. But Zorro, I've always looked at that and been like, yeah, there's set pieces, the drama, the melodrama, like the practical filmmaking. A lot of that comes from indie. But also the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland and Disney World. You know, it's just Indiana Jones was everywhere. You know, it was one of the first things that introduced me to like one of the main cultural staples of Raiders would be the Rugrats movie. The Rugrats movie has a whole cold open dedicated to the cold open of Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it's well done.
Sure, yeah. Also, like UHF, don't they also do something similar with that?
UHF?
No, UHF, the Weird Al movie. Don't they do like a pretty like shot for shot like recreation of the Raiders opening? Am I misremembering?
What's UHF?
The Weird Al movie.
The one that came out last year?
No, not Weird.
I was going to
say.
UHF.
Well, you got
I've never seen it.
Go to Letterboxd, type in UHF. And put that movie in your watch list, baby, because that's a pretty good comp.
It's like you are a Jeff?
No, U, the letter U, the letter H, and the letter F.
I'm looking at it right now. Oh, I've seen this poster.
I was going to say.
Definitely seen this poster. Kevin McCarthy. The congressman? Just kidding. Not David Bowie, but David Bowe? Who are these people? Okay, I see it. I have a lot of mutuals who have watched it, and they're probably, you know, when they're listening to this, are going to be like, John, you should watch movies from now on.
Sure, yeah, it's a good idea. But anyway, going back to indie, I will say Last Crusade, probably my second favorite indie film. Is it playing it safe? Sure. Is it less memorable than Raiders and even Temple of Doom? Sure. But it just has that great dynamic of Sean Connery and Harrison Ford working together. It's fresh, but it's also poignant. It has some emotional heft to it.
I like the Ilsa romance. I think the femme fatale thing, like it works. I know there are people who look at it and they're like with fresh eyes and they're like, that's a little weird, isn't it? You know, like kissing Nazis, and it's like, all right, like it was 1989. It was a different time.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I rewatched that movie. I was really taken by how great like the set pieces are for that movie. You know, it has a lot of great action beats. Like I said, I don't feel it's as memorable as the first two, but I just feel like that movie still really works. And I feel like that movie does the thing that a lot of movies try to do now and usually don't accomplish, where it does like here's why he's afraid of snakes. Here's where he got the hat. Here's where all this stuff. But it actually feels like fun and fresh. Like it's like we get this all out in the first 10 minutes. It's not like, you know, as much as I do ultimately enjoy Solo, like I feel like that movie is like too beholden to like, here's where he gets the jacket. Here's where he gets the Millennium Falcon, all that stuff. And
here's why he's obsessed with museums.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, and also, obviously, you know, the great, late great River Phoenix does a wonderful job imitating Harrison Ford there. And, so. You know, I mean, it's a fun set piece at the beginning of the film.
The opening still works really well. And you know what? I just remembered, besides last night, the last time I watched Last Crusade was literally when I was in high school. We went on a bus ride and they were playing it they played it like twice on like the bus like TVs or whatever.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, I've just never watched that movie in a proper format. I wonder what it would be like to see The Last Crusade that way. But I've seen so many like parodies and stuff of like Chosen Poorly, like all that stuff. And again, it's like these movies have always been in the periphery. They've always been in the background for me. But compared to you, I know you're teeing into Crystal Skull.
Sure.
I had no excitement or hype whatsoever for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but everyone around me did. Everyone around me was like, I cannot, like, this movie looks fantastic. When the first still came out, Harrison Ford, as Indy again, people were like, I can't wait. There was the hype for it was almost kind of the same as Phantom Menace, it seemed like. Yeah. And I was just sort of like, it's another movie. It's probably not going to be like, I would watch the trailers. Like, I was working at the movie theater at the time. I'd see the trailer all the time, and I'd be like, I don't know. To me, it looks kind of lame. I didn't think it looked very good. And he's older. Like, what's the point? Sure. And I've just always felt like I'm not the Indiana Jones stan that I should be, because these are my kind of movies. Right. You're hearing this, and I can see you being like, this doesn't make any sense. This isn't computing. This is John we're talking about.
Yeah. John
loves like lame, cheesy, swashbuckling adventure B-movie material. And so what's going on here? But I don't know. And I had no hype for Dial of Destiny at all. I was like, whatever, another Indiana Jones movie, if you say so.
No, I mean, I was going to say, in regards to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, that was the summer of 2008. And even though, like I said, like, I feel like I don't have like a deep reverence for Indiana Jones, like the hype to see Indiana Jones on the big screen again made that movie probably my like most anticipated for the summer. And this is the summer that had, the Dark Knight and like Iron Man and like several other notable films, including everyone's favorite animated film, Space Chimps.
Yeah, Space Chimps. For me, I mean, my most anticipated would probably be Mamma Mia.
Yeah, same weekend. All those three movies, same weekend.
But also Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, and The Incredible Hulk. So like if anything, I was a little bit more curious about Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. I was like, oh, another Mummy movie. Brendan, let's go.
No, I mean, that's the thing, right? Is that like, even though I had probably more affection for like that first Mummy compared to the Indy sequels, I was like, Mummy, I'm down with that. Indy's back. Like, I'm over the Mummy movie. Like in that third one, like, I think maybe I was kind of tainted by the Scorpion King, and like the second Mummy movie is as good as the first one and had like kind of wonky CG and stuff, and I don't know, I was fully back into the Indy train by that point, so I was pretty hyped.
I would say honestly, like I just did not have any interest. I mean, we didn't even mention there are a few other big ones. Like there was WALL-E was that summer.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I was so excited for WALL-E. I was excited for Hancock because I was like, oh man, Will Smith in a superhero movie, that sounds really fun. And Kung Fu Panda, I remember I was like, that looks pretty good. Yeah, and Wanted was like, oh cool, an R-rated kind of comic book thing.
The first R-rated movie I ever saw in theaters, Wanted.
There was also the Hellboy sequel. There was the I think The Strangers was technically a summer thing, and there was some hype for that. Step Brothers was around that time, and Tropic Thunder, Pineapple Express. I mean, 2008 was stacked.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. Yeah,
and it's like to me, that's why I was like, I couldn't be bothered. I was like, Indiana Jones, like I've got too much else on my plate, quite honestly.
Sure. Yeah.
And then sure enough, I watched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and I was like, yeah, that sucked. Like I didn't, I genuinely was like, this movie long and boring. Thanks.
Yeah, I know. I mean, we're going to have our first ever argument on Cinemaholics.
I have not rewatched Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I will say I didn't hate the movie the first like 20 minutes or something, but the last 30 of that movie, I was so checked out, like so beyond checked out. And I don't know how it would hold up for me today. Maybe my tune would be a little bit different.
I mean, like I said, having recently rewatched these movies, I will say Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, it holds up less than I remember. I think I ultimately, and this is going to be sacrilegious, I feel like, to the internet. So I'm going to have to dodge some porks and pitchforks,
arrows and
pitchforks. Yeah. But I think Temple of Doom and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull are like kind of on par with each other.
I mean, that's not that controversial. I've seen people put that out.
I mean, considering that people like still freak out about like nuke the fridge and all that stuff, which
Sure.
I'm sorry, nuke the fridge. That scene is probably the best in the whole movie. Like, I don't know why people get such a big like stink about that. I mean, is it kind of silly?
I know what you mean. Well, that was like the height, I think, of like when Reddit was really starting to pick up as a thing. And I remember when it happened, I was just like, huh? Oh, okay, that doesn't make any sense, but whatever, move on. Like, I was like, yeah, I mean, we're watching a schlocky B movie. Like, am I supposed to expect something different?
I mean, it's no less implausible than the scene in Temple of Doom when they jump off of the plane into the like raft and they go down and they fall into like the waterfall and like they're completely unharmed.
Or when young River Phoenix gets into a magic box and like somehow magically like goes under the train and runs off unscathed.
I still think that's so much fun, but
it is. Yeah.
But I mean, obviously I agree with you in the sense that I think the big issue with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is that it gets worse probably about like 45 minutes to an hour into it, in the second half suffers a lot from just baffling creative decisions and overly CGI. Because, like you said, the practical effects and the way the movie feels, those movies feel like real and like they feel like people are really like getting their hands dirty and all that stuff gets lost when they feel like they're all on a green screen and Shia LaBeouf is swinging from branches like the monkeys, and I mean that stuff is dumb. I don't really mind the end. I feel like people get really critical about like the actual use of aliens. I'm fine with that. I don't really get that big of an issue. I do think that movie does kind of suffer from revealing itself a little too early on with like, we find out Mac is like a triple crossing guy, and we find out here are the villains, here are all this stuff, and then
the Ryan Winstone character never made sense to me. But I would say that like it's for the aliens, it's not the what, it's the how.
Sure.
Like I don't care that it's aliens. I just care that like the way that they use the aliens is just very unremarkable to and it doesn't stink. I think with the tone of the movie, and I think they could have done a much better job with the aliens. Like Arrival, I would have the same complaint if it had used the same kind of alien reference point. Honestly,
sure. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I think it's a fine film. Like I really don't have the begrudging hate that people have for that movie. I can understand the complaints. I can see why people were probably more angry and disappointed by it.
Yeah, but for me, again, I don't have anger, disappointment. I didn't have expectations. I was just indifferent.
Sure.
And I was like, yeah, I mean, this might as well end. Like, this is the last one. That's probably for the best.
I didn't have the angry and begrudged feelings that I had towards Hancock, as you mentioned, which that's a film. Now, that's a movie that starts strong in the first 20 minutes and then just completely shits the bed as it goes along. Like, what happened?
Yeah, it's like after their fight or whatever, I was like, well, I guess this isn't a good movie, but we had some laughs along the way.
Right. No, I mean that's just a waste of a great premise. And then like
it is.
Like I don't like the beginning's great, and then like once he's in jail, it's like whatever. This is not a Hancock review. Honestly,
with Hancock, that is all I'll say. It's like it's better to view it as like a short film, just to kind of like check out after Charlize Theron does that thing.
Yeah,
but yeah.
Yeah, we'll have to discuss Hancock in our bonus review of Hancock.
The Hancock sequel. It's a day away. But yeah, so that was Crystal Skull. And I think that at that point, the writing was on the wall that like if they're going to do another Indiana Jones movie, it's got to be somebody else. It's got to be a different director. And they've been talking about doing something with Indy and making like more films like for years. I mean, I think as early as like 2012, like I think people were still interested in George Lucas's idea for a movie that he had for the fifth one, going back as far as like when Crystal Skull came out, but it just never came together. And I think because people understood that the movies just could never build up that same hype and momentum anytime soon. It was also difficult, I think, to bring Harrison Ford back after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was on such a low note. But around the time when Lucasfilm and Star Wars and everything like that was firmly like in Disney, like years after they had been purchased, but also like when Disney was kind of figuring out its branding for like, here's how we're going to do Force Awakens. Here's the next 5 years of Star Wars stuff. I think that's when Kathleen Kennedy was starting to be like, all right, I think they confirmed they were going to do another Indiana Jones movie in like 2015 or something, the year that Force Awakens came out. And but it took them time to really like just further develop the concept. Sure enough, though, they did come up with something they were going to do. They kept delaying it into the 2020s, particularly because I think that they did want Spielberg back, but he was busy. Like, he was still doing, I think, one of the movies that got in the way was Ready Player One. And eventually they switched over to James Mangold, who directs this movie. And I think picking James Mangold, irrespective of what you think of the actual movie, I think is actually a really smart choice. Because as a director, Mangold, it's interesting because he's both anonymous, but he also is an auteur in a very specific way. He's anonymous in the sense that he's done every type of movie there is. He's got a specific style, but it's not tied to genre. He can make a movie like Copland. He can also make a movie like Logan and Ford versus Ferrari. Like, he's a very unusual director because those are all unmistakably, to me, James Mangold movies.
Sure. But
they have almost nothing in common. I can't look at a movie like Walk the Line and tie it to 3:10 to Yuma. Like, there's just no way for me to do that. But I think both of those movies are very much his. Also, Girl Interrupted is another choice example of that. And he hasn't made a ton of movies over the years. I think the movies that I think he's done, I think he's a good writer as well. He hasn't written all of his movies, but I don't think he wrote Ford versus Ferrari, for example. But he's definitely a director who I think was a smart choice. But we can debate that. I don't know if you agree.
I mean, it makes sense on paper, obviously, and then I can see why after Logan, the way he was able to kind of tie up this decade-spanning character for Fox and for their division of the X-Men franchise totally makes sense. And like you said, he's like a top-tier journeyman director right now in the sense that he can really produce like a good product, but he's not going to be like beholden to a style. If he's going to be filling in for someone like Spielberg in this case, like, he's not going to be, like, put too many Mangoldisms in there to like make it feel jarring or out of place. He's going to probably copy his father, the grandfather of the franchise's style here.
If he was a Pokemon, he'd be Ditto.
Sure.
And everybody loves Ditto.
But then at the same time, and it's like, I don't know how much one can be criticized for this. It's like, he's not Spielberg. And, that's not a fair comparison. I mean, it's not fair in most cases.
Yeah, you're like, look, he's not the greatest blockbuster director of all time. So,
right.
Like some people were guessing or wondering about that.
But yeah, I mean, it's like, if you have like, an airplane, maybe a poor comparison given Harrison Ford's history, but you have an airplane and it's being guided by one guy for 4 of the 5 hours of the trip. And then when you're about to land, that expert pilot, Captain Sully or whatever, is like, oh, I'm going to go use the bathroom. Hey, my rookie guy, why don't you land the plane? And it's like, that's the most important thing, is landing the plane, in a steady way. I mean, I feel like if he came in to do like a middle installment, it'd be like, you just kind of like filling in. But like for the very last film, it feels way more jarring to me to have someone trying to emulate, another filmmaker's style in a way that it's less intrusive for the X-Men movies, because like, who's he really copying? Like Bryan Singer? He's just like, he's just, and those movies are far more anonymous in style, and he had the luxury to kind of just be like, I'm just going to do Shane with Wolverine. And this movie, it's like, I have to figure out with every single shot and composition, what would Steven Spielberg do? And that's just pretty much like a thankless task for anybody.
I would say that Mangold, so often this question has come up of who is the successor to Steven Spielberg? And where most people land is there is not one. There are certainly directors who have approximated the Spielberg career and what he's accomplished. There are people, fantastic directors, who have been called like the next Spielberg, who have just ultimately not fulfilled that. Mangold is one of them. Mangold is one of the ones going back as far as the Wolverine and all that. It's like, this is a guy who kind of like Spielberg. He can make big movies that work, but never quite like I mean, in case of Mangold, never close, I think, to like what Spielberg was able to accomplish. People put out like Alfonso Cuarón and, M. Night Shyamalan famously, and even some of Spielberg's contemporaries like Zemeckis. J.J. Abrams, somebody that people thought like, oh, maybe Abrams is the guy. Like maybe he's the one. Him and Ron Howard, but sure enough, like nobody's ever been able to pull it off. So to me, it's like, don't try. Like Spielberg wasn't trying to be anybody else but him, right? And I think that like if you were going to pick any directors to fill in the shoes of Spielberg, not to be Spielberg, it's and they're not even like directing all their stuff, but Phil Lord and Chris Miller, who are just like, these are people who are coming in and shaking things up. If that's how you want to fit it.
Two directors who are on Lucasfilm's good graces, Phil Lord, Chris Miller.
It is wild to me, right? That they were the ones who were supposed to shepherd Solo. And sometimes I think like, what would the Star Wars cinematic landscape look like if they had stayed with Solo? But if you go through that mind experiment, you also have to go through, what if Colin Trevorrow had done Rise of Skywalker? I think a lot of people agree that probably wouldn't have been as bad as Rise of Skywalker under Abrams, right?
Absolutely.
Even though Trevorrow did both Jurassic World Dominion and the Book of Henry. And I think a lot of people look at that and say, well, I just want to see his Rise of Skywalker. It might have been interestingly bad. Who knows?
Yeah.
But anyway, Dial of Destiny, which I'll just to reiterate, I went into this movie no expectations because I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to like it. I haven't liked these movies that much ever. I've never been super into these movies. And I think like, again, people will hear that and be like, but John, you went to bat for Uncharted. Like, what is wrong with you? Again, I don't know what it is. I appreciate these movies. I enjoy them. They're not movies I rewatch over and over again. They're not movies that I find all that, like, to me, like they're B-grade movies. They've always been that way. And I think like people put like an air of importance on them that I don't understand. Like, I've just always felt like people just put like so much stock into like Indiana Jones as a character and as a story, I guess, to me, which is like, nah, these are the original theme park ride movies. Like their whole construction is like riding a roller coaster. They're fun. They're like, to me, it's like, I don't treat them as anything more.
I mean, yes and no as far as the theme park comparison. I certainly feel that way about like something like Temple of Doom. Like there's even like a segment in there that kind of feels like a Universal Studios ride. But I think they're more just emulating the serials that they watched, they being Lucas and Spielberg, like growing up as a kid.
That's what they want. That was the whole point. They wanted to make those kinds of movies, and it was because Spielberg wanted to make a James Bond movie, but MGM wouldn't let him. So he and Lucas came up with this. Or
like, is it Buck Rogers? Is that the name of the
Buck Rogers? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this kind of like adventure movie, like again, it's like they weren't made to, I think, be these emotionally resonant, sweeping, my life has changed after watching this kind of movies. But I don't know. I think people are still like chasing a high they got from watching Raiders of the Lost Ark for the first time. And to me, it's like, it's not like Star Wars, for example. Star Wars, I think that resonates on a deeper level, at least for me. And I think most people will look at Star Wars and be like, man, that is like a very like escapist story with a lot of stuff going on in its writing and everything. These movies, I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to go to the theater. And, in this case, like this is the second time I've seen one of these movies in an actual like movie theater, 4 walls. And I treat it as such. I treat it as like, yeah, I might like it. Probably not, though. I will say, knowing that Phoebe Waller-Bridge was going to be in this, I didn't know anything else about the movie. I didn't watch the trailers or anything. So but I had seen the poster. I knew that she was in it. I was like, okay, well, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Fleabag, she's fun. Like that to me seems like a better choice of a successor or sort of foil to Indy than Shia LaBeouf was. I think that one of the biggest mistakes of Crystal Skull was like, oh, he's like his son and we're bringing Marion back like this. And I don't know. I just never really bought into that. I was like, what?
I disagree. I disagree.
I think, I don't know. Like, I feel like he has more like a stepdad energy, Harrison Ford's Indiana Jones. Not like, oh, I have an actual son by blood.
I thought it made perfect sense to follow up Last Crusade with him having his own dad issues. Like, it just made absolute sense to me. Like, he would have a troubled relationship with his father. Subsequently, he would have a troubled relationship with his dysfunctional son.
Maybe I forgot, though, but wasn't like the whole thing with his son, like he didn't even know he existed?
Sure. I mean, the height of dysfunctional fatherhood is if you don't even know you're a father.
Maybe I need to rewatch Crystal Skull, because was it even his fault? Like, was it something that Marion kept from him, or was it because he was like bad to Marion? I don't remember. It's been 15 years.
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. Column A, column B.
I don't know. I think I'd have to watch the movies. You did rewatch both of the movies, so you have probably a deeper, like, okay, here's where they go together, I guess. Yeah, but yeah, I don't have that.
I mean, you could argue about whether Marion Ravenwood is like the true love of Indy's life or whatever, but
that's unmistakable.
Sure. I mean, I never minded that. I mean, like, you could argue that's more debatable. I never got the complaint about Indy having a son, and I thought Shia LaBeouf did a very good job. Like, I thought he fit the role quite well.
No.
My compliments towards Shia LaBeouf are maybe a little bit more sparse these days, considering his character. But I mean, as far as the performance and the character goes, I thought it made perfect sense.
So this movie, as we mentioned, James Mangold directs and co-writes with a host of screenwriters, David Koepp, John Henry Butterworth, and Jez Butterworth. And the movie picks up in 1969. And so Indiana Jones, he is retiring from being a professor / archaeologist. He's now in his 80s at this point, I think. I think he's like 81 right now, Harrison Ford. And I think in the movie timeline, he's around that age too.
Harrison Ford's 80.
Okay. And the last movie took place in 1957. So we're picking up just 12 years later instead of 15 years later. But we're now in 1969. It's when the Apollo space mission is coming back, Apollo 11. And it's an interesting choice of time, because you do have sort of like this guy who's obsessed with history, and like the world around him is obsessed with the future, going to the moon and back and all this stuff. And we have a cold open where we see a de-aged Harrison Ford, and it's an extended cold open. I mean, I went rewatching Last Crusade. I was like, man, these used to be short. These used to be like get in and out in 10 minutes. And this thing was like half an hour or something. And we kind of see him in the 1940s, so height of World War II, which, you know, the last movie, like Last Crusade, ended right before World War II started. So that was kind of interesting. It's like, oh, what was Indiana Jones doing during the World War? And we get our answer to that. He was, as expected, punching Nazis and kind of, you know, doing stuff like that behind the scenes. But there's this whole thing where he and Toby Jones are like on this like little mini adventure, and they come across the Dial of Archimedes, which is our big MacGuffin. And there's this whole thing around the Dial of Archimedes, and that the Nazis want it, and specifically a Nazi researcher who eventually becomes a scientist for NASA and helps get the rockets to the moon. And that's Ethann Isidore. Or no, not Ethann Isidore. That's not the name of the character. The name of the character is Jürgen Voller, played by Mads Mikkelsen. Excuse me. And he and his like team of like evil dudes. Ethann Isidore plays the sidekick in Tangier, Teddy, who shows up at one point. And so Mads Mikkelsen is our big villain. And then Phoebe Waller-Bridge plays Helena Shaw, who is Harrison Ford or Indiana Jones' goddaughter. And she comes to him in 1969 and is like, hey, that dial that you and my father found, because she's the daughter of the Toby Jones character. And she's like, that dial you found, you know, where is it? And then she's like looking for it. And so we kick off this whole adventure where it's a race against time, and Nazi or former Nazis turned neo-Nazis, I guess, for this dial with mysterious powers. We go to places like Morocco and Greece, and even a ticker tape parade in New York City. I walked out of this movie really surprised, and I know you were surprised by my reaction. I ended up really liking it, and this premiered at Cannes, and it got very, very middling responses because it came out at Cannes. I do find it funny whenever studios are like, well, we have this movie, we think like maybe it has a shot at Best Picture. Let's premiere it at Cannes, though. You got to premiere it at like a festival, right? And I think sometimes that's a very poor mistake because first of all, these movies don't have to premiere at festivals to get awards. Like, this is not really like not necessary. It's the movie. But anyway, it got mixed reviews, and it's gotten so far kind of a, you know, it's a big budget movie. This thing cost upwards of like probably around $300 million. It's one of the most expensive movies of the year. It's the most expensive Indiana Jones movie. And I came out of it being like, yeah, that was expensive. And I think a lot of this movie is unfortunate. And I want to get into like what disappoints me about Indiana Jones movies and adventure movies in general these days. But for what it is, I thought this movie was a bit of a rip-roaring blast for me. I had a lot of fun with it. I think that you just kind of have to get through a little some sloggy stuff that happens in the middle. But I think that the ending is really where people are going to like be for it or against it. And I thought the ending was like just right. I genuinely thought that was actually like that fit the DNA of an Indiana Jones movie. We won't give it away, obviously, but I don't know. I had a feeling though, walking out of the movie, I was like, this is a John movie. I do not see this being this is not a Will Ashton movie. Am I right about that?
So I had mixed feelings, I'll say, overall. I agree that I think my expectations for this one were certainly a lot more tampered than they were for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Not because of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull itself, but just because I was like, at the time, people made a big stink about, Harrison Ford being an older Indiana Jones, but he was still like 60 or something. It was, it was fine. It was different. I mean, and it made sense to kind of end it there. Like a man who, like as we see in that nuclear atomic bomb test, like a man who's like kind of out of time and out of sync. He's entering the nuclear age. He's not the man he once was. And so he's kind of settling down and finding, peace with this one final adventure. It made sense to me as like, all right, this is where we're going to conclude the Indiana Jones series. If we didn't already kind of make peace with that with Last Crusade, with them walking off into the sunset and all that. So yeah, I mean, it was one of the things where, I didn't really understand. And then when Spielberg left, I was like, what's the point of this? I mean, I'm happy for Harrison Ford. Like I want him to kind of get a smile on that grizzled face of his, but I really don't. Without Spielberg, what are we doing here? But I mean, the reaction from Cannes definitely tampered my expectations more because I was still hoping for the best because the trailers looked fun. I was still like, okay, there could be something here. Mangold's a good replacement. Phoebe Waller-Bridge seems like a fun, addition to the cast. Mads Mikkelsen totally makes sense as the villain. Toby Jones.
And can I say, because you mentioned the trailer, I did watch the trailer while I was working on my review. Great trailer. Sure. Sympathy for the Devil. I was like, oh man, this movie looks pretty cool. Can't wait to see it. Oh yeah.
I mean, I still think it's a little weird to hear Sympathy for the Devil with Indiana Jones, but still a fun trailer.
I think it works.
Sure.
Just barely. By the skin of its teeth. It's kind of like it's like a perfect save as in perfect Hindi fashion, right?
I mean, compared to like what the way that the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull uses Elvis to kind of establish a time, I feel it's a little bit more graceful about that than like the trailers for this movie, but that's marketing, that's not the film. In any case, the reaction from Cannes definitely kind of watered my expectations. Granted, it's not like this is unheard of. Like I think Kingdom of the Crystal Skull also premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. I think it was less damaging than this, but nevertheless, I think
we weren't in the social media age in 2008. Facebook and Twitter were just like they were young bucks, right?
Mm. But yeah, I mean, it just seemed like my fears were kind of being proven at the festival based on those reviews. Like it just seemed like people were kind of like, it's kind of messy, it's over long, it doesn't have the Spielberg touch. What are we doing here? Kind of a needless film. And I was like, all right. I was kind of just bracing myself for, the worst. But you come out of it, and then the reviews after the film, in addition to yours, were pretty much, more positive. They were like, okay, is it the best film ever? Is it Raiders of the Lost Ark? No, but it's fun. And I'm like, okay, I'll go in, hope for the best. And there's stuff here I like, there's stuff here I just don't like at all. I think the beginning of the film is rough. The de-aging in particular is just, it does not work. It gives the film kind of like a Polar Express quality that I think is unintentional, as well as like a video game quality that I think, feels like the exact antithesis of what I want from Indiana Jones. Like it's cool and interesting to see what he's like during the Second World War, because there's only like brief allusions to it in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But yeah, it just seeing his face not organically move with his younger body, and then having kind of like this weird effect where his voice is still 80-year-old Harrison Ford, but coming out of like a face that's made to look like him in Blade Runner. It just doesn't quite fit the mold for me. And it felt like that scene just made me yearn for like the conciseness and the zippiness of The Last Crusade. So like when we have like this overly long plotting extended cold open, I'm like, oh man, we're going to have quite an argument here on Cinemaholics, the podcast. But, you know, once we actually get to like Phoebe Waller-Bridge and you get introduced to Mads Mikkelsen a little bit better, you get to see Boyd Holbrook, who, you know, a James Mangold regular, kind of really fitting into this well, as well as a few other fun nods to the 70s. I'm like, okay, you know, I'm actually kind of getting into this. This is interesting. It's fun. And there's like an extended chase scene with Harrison Ford on a horse in the New York subway system. I was like, okay, it's like way one for Mindy. It's fun. It doesn't have like quite the precision that you would get from a Spielberg directed action scene, but there's some really fun touches. Like, you know, it feels inspired. I'm hoping for the best. And then once we kind of get into like the traditional, like now we're on an adventure, we're traveling the world, I feel like that's weirdly where the movie starts to kind of tamper down and kind of get repetitious. And it feels kind of stale, and it doesn't seem like there's that much excitement as far as the visual presentation of the film. It gets a little flat, and I feel like Phoebe Waller-Bridge does the best she can with it, but doesn't really have that zippiness, especially with a makeshift short round who is just totally intermediable, just doesn't really affect the plot one way or the other, just feels completely useless to me.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a whole thing where they have to like go save him, but then not really, and then there's a subversion of like who gets to take out the big old boy.
Sure. But yeah, I mean, at that point I'm kind of starting to check out. It's really long. If every action scene feels like it's like 5 or 10 minutes too long, and I'm kind of just like, whatever, it's just a mediocre Indiana Jones movie. And then we get to, like you said, I won't give it away, but we get to like the last act of the film. And like it really kind of surprised me, like how we get this like huge set piece that's like really inventive and fun, and like it feels totally in line with James Bond, but feels like something you could only pull off now in terms of technology. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, okay, this is actually really interesting. And then we get to a note, and obviously I won't get away, but like we get to a note that's like, if they have the balls to kind of end it here, this is like totally unexpected, and also like a really kind of perfect note to end Indiana Jones on. And they kind of chicken out, and they don't quite do that, but they still end it.
I don't think it's a chicken out. I think it's a purposeful, like this is tied to the message of the movie.
Sure. I get what you're saying. I feel it's kind of both. But just for fun, I'll say they chicken out. And they end it on a note that's still really nice and sweet and actually kind of tender. Not as good as that other one that they tease, but still like, okay, this doesn't feel... It's enough to make it feel like, okay, this isn't a wasted effort. And I feel like throughout the film, I'm underselling how good Harrison Ford is. Yeah. He's giving like this really moving performance. Like it's clear that he really loves his character, and that he didn't just do this just for the sake of it. It's not like him playing Han Solo, even though he was good, obviously, in Force Awakens. But yeah, I mean, he's giving a very kind of mournful, thoughtful performance here, and it's like, okay, like it only makes me a little bit more frustrated that the rest of the movie's not living up to that or to Phoebe Waller-Bridge. Because it's like, okay, like he's clearly bringing it. And he's doing something unique with the character, and he's not like shying away from his age. Like it's an interesting portrayal. And I think they really kind of get it right in key scenes at the end to make me like tear, like, you know, get on the fence of like, okay, maybe I do kind of like this overall, but I still feel like the stuff that lags and stuff that kind of drags prevents me from really loving it. But I'll say that if it had cut off before that end, like if it had cut off before we got any of that stuff, I would have been like, this is a wash, this is bad. But having that ending in mind and ending it on like a really nice note makes me more sympathetic than I would have been otherwise.
That's about what I expect. I did not expect you to like the movie as much as I did, and I think that all makes sense and is well argued. I think for me, the cold open works because the whole point of the cold open, right, is one last Indiana Jones adventure in his prime. So we get to see him one last time, and I think the de-aging works more than it doesn't. There are times when it's like glaring, like, and very difficult to sit through, but it's a dark environment. And when you hear his voice, you're like, oh yeah, like that is not, you know, that is not a man in his 40s. But I think what works about it is that the staging is quite nice. And I think there's an element of the cold open that applies to the rest of the movie, as overlong as it is and as beefy as it is as a movie. The construction of it is simpler. there aren't. It's not an army of bad guys. It's just kind of like a small group of antagonists. The chase scenes are very focused. I think that, yeah, a couple of the chase scenes go on a little bit too long, but I do think it has those thrills. I think part of what makes it thrilling is that Mangold lets the amount of characters be reduced, and so it feels a little bit more personal. It feels a little bit more one-on-one. Now, here's the thing. As much as I enjoy this movie, here's my recipe for an Indiana Jones movie that would be a huge success, because this movie I don't think is going to make money. I think it's probably going to flop, almost certainly. I think it would have to make upwards of like 600 million in order to just break even.
Yeah.
I think it'll maybe make 300. So it's gonna.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it'll make probably like 500 worldwide.
Maybe it did have 150. It's at 150 right now. But I think that it's such a crowded environment. Like maybe it'll make upwards of 350 to 400. 500 is on the high end, though. I just don't think this movie has legs.
Sure,
we'll see.
I'm just looking at it compared to like obviously Fast X didn't do great here, but still doing pretty well internationally. I feel like that might be the case for this film. I don't know if it's going to be able to open in China or if it's what the market's like for it, but I feel like it'll do well enough overseas to kind of lighten the burden of it, but not enough to make it a success.
I just think the problem with that I see is that June was just an absurdly crowded month in terms of big releases, like way too much. It has opened in China. It's made 2.3 million in China. It's already opened in a lot of markets, 52 countries, and 70 million of its 150 is overseas. So to your point, it is picking up, but yeah, I just think that there's going to be too much competition. We'll see. All that said, this is my recipe for Indiana Jones. This is what I would have wanted. First of all, I think we both agree that the green screen stuff, the CG stuff, to me, it does not feel like a decision of the filmmakers. To me, it just feels like a contrivance of the studio. This is what people want to see. They want to see Indiana Jones, but in the modern era. You have to do all of these advanced special effects. You have to make everything bigger and whatever. If you had marketed this movie around, they made this movie mostly practical effects and to mimic the style of the 80s movies, but with like only the slightest modern touches, where it still has that griminess. It still has that like that old school quality. Make it look like an 80s movie. Still, like they have the technology to do that. I think of like all the times we watch these like grainy A24 movies. You watch something like Funny Pages, where they're like evoking the style of like something that came out in the early 2000s or late 90s. If you did that with Indiana Jones, A, it would be way cheaper, and B, people would be excited about that because people like it's different. Like I think that they're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into these budgets, and audiences are not getting anything out of that. And I think that people are kind of looking at the landscape in general with Hollywood, and they're saying, why do these movies cost so much? They look bad. Flash did not look good. This visual effects did not look good. And a lot of it is because they're spending a lot of money, but they're not giving these people enough time to pull these things off because visual effects are so hard to get right. It takes so much time and effort, as we see with something like Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. It took, 5 years? And I think that if you would do something a little bit more practical, I think the studios are the ones who just keep getting in the way of that. They're like, well, we can't sell a movie like that. It has to, no. It has to be larger than life. It has to, you have to go to space. You have to do all these amazing things because people will be like, well, I already saw that movie. But I'm just saying, man, if you made an Indiana Jones movie, still set in 1969, but it looked older, like on purpose, like whether or not they do it with post or they use old school cameras, whatever it is, and you're using like animatronics and it looks a little bit faker in theory, I think it would kill. I think people would be like, wow, that looks cool. Like, oh man, yeah, I want to see that in the theater because like it's kind of like going back in time. Like these movies are losing escapism because like now that everything is ubiquitously like special effects, going to the movie theater to get that is just, it's old hat. It's like, what am I getting? Like, I'm just getting the same old thing now. I'm not getting like a new world like Jurassic Park promised me, or a new sort of like, wow, a sensational, like this is what you can do with special effects in a way that's like unpredictable, like you do with like Star Wars. So that's my pitch, Will Ashton. Are you going to give me the money to do it? Make my Indiana Jones movie? I would not make a movie.
It's hard to say. I mean, at the beginning of the summer, I was pretty confident that this would be one of the biggest films of the summer. And for all I know, maybe it will be, probably not.
And I definitely was less. I remember we talked about this. I was like, I don't know, Will. And
Sure.
you're like, John, hold after Andy. You never know.
Sure.
He's going to give him hell.
Hold my hat. But no, I mean, I think, especially watching the film, it feels like kind of the epitome of like studio thinking right now, where it's just like, you know what kids are going to love? Seeing an 80-year-old man grapple with his mortality and just like his regrets in life. Let's give that budget $300 million. Like,
yeah, because that is a big thing. Like I saw people being like, well, why isn't this movie making as much money? It's like, well, it's hard when your main actor is in his 80s, and like the kids don't want to go see that. And Phoebe Waller-Bridge is not like a star. Like I think that was the thing behind Shia LaBeouf, and it's unfortunate because I do think Phoebe Waller-Bridge is really good in this. Like I liked her a lot. I don't know if you didn't really say, right, if you liked Bridge. I mean, I guess you said that like the movie, she's better than the movie around her.
Yeah, I mean, I think she's good. I mean, I think she's just doing, what's kind of expected. Like, I don't think she, like, elevates the material beyond, like, she gets a very Phoebe Waller-Bridge performance, which I love. I mean, yeah.
It's fun to see at least in terms of the writing, the mentee is also the femme fatale. That's like a fun, like, oh, that's something different to do here.
Yeah, I mean, I take no issue with her. I think she does the best she can with the material, and I think she works well with Harrison Ford.
I want to do something a little bit different. I feel like we have not been as populist here on Cinemaholics. I want to read a couple of the popular Letterboxd reviews and let you react to them, both positive and negative. How about that?
Oh, boy.
So this is James. He gave the movie 1.5 stars. He said, a near inconceivable train wreck. I went in morbidly curious if it was slightly better or worse than Crystal Skull, and instead, I got something whose closest kin is Rise of Skywalker, undoing nearly everything from its controversial predecessor, but forgetting to fill the gaping hole at its center with anything meaningful or worthwhile. Boring sidekicks, buffoonish villains who teleport to wherever the plot needs them to be, a complete lack of visual style, trite dialogue outside of a single good one-liner about Poland, and an overwhelming sense of been there, done that permeate this obscenely dull and overly long snooze fest. He goes on. There's plenty more here, but sure. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, a little harsher than I would be. I get the been there, done that feeling of it until the end. We didn't really talk a lot about the villains. I mean, we mentioned Mads Mikkelsen's in the film and a little bit about his character. But yeah, I mean, I was going to say, like, I don't know. Mads Mikkelsen, I think he gives a performance that he could give in his sleep. He's fine, but, like, he's played this character many times before. I kind of wish the movie was more willing to make Boyd Holbrook like the central villain, because I feel like his character is way more interesting, and especially in like a timely way, like the idea of like his character kind of being infatuated with these forces of evil that lost and feeling like he can buddy up and like, kind of fix the errors of the past and get with someone who has that mentality is way more interesting in a timely fashion, and that could fit in that time period. And I wish they leaned into that more. And I don't know if that's Disney being like, hey, we can't like push back on, like these political factors or whatever. But I feel like I would have been more engrossed in the film if they actually leaned into that idea.
This is from Rhys. He has the most positive review on the list of the popular reviews on Letterboxd. Rhys wrote, one of the first memories I have as a kid is watching Raiders of the Lost Ark with my dad. Today, I just saw the final Indiana Jones film in Cannes with Harrison Ford in the room. I cried. So kind of that festival reaction, right?
That's sweet. That's sweet.
I guess he sees Harrison Ford as another kind of father, right?
Yeah, that's a touching review.
And most of these reviews are around 3 stars. Here's one of them. Nazis get punched. This is from Cinema Joe. Nazis get punched. Treasure gets hunted. And there's a lot of jokes about Indy being old. Your standard Indy and Disney fanfare, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But in its attempt to capture the Spielbergian charm, Dial of Destiny at times feels more like the next entry in a Fast and Furious movie than it does an indie movie. Big CGI action, set pieces that are entertaining at first, but never blow you away. Repetitive and drawn out for far too long. A little bit more on top of that, but definitely the review continues around those same lines. Do you agree?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm closer to that one than the 3 you've read so far, or the 2 you've read so far.
The 2.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like you say, like I think there's stuff this movie does well, and I think there's things this movie doesn't do well. I feel like at this time, the stuff that doesn't quite get right is nagging on me more than the stuff that I feel like it does pretty well. But I don't know. Maybe if I sit with it more, I'll really kind of be touched by how kind of unexpectedly affecting I find the ending to be.
Let's finish out with the Rotten Tomatoes game. All right, so we have 313 reviews counted for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. 313, that's a lot. Well, Ashton, what do you think the critic score is right now? One of them is mine, and I liked it. I gave it 7.5 out of 10.
I think it's positive. I don't know if it's like certified fresh positive. Probably not, considering the reviews of the Cannes Film Festival, which I think made the film debut at like a 50% or something like that early on.
I think it debuted too with like fewer than 100, but
sure,
reviews. But I think it was a lot. A lot of people saw this that night.
Yeah, but in any case, it's probably going to be higher than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I think has like a 62%, but not as high as the original. So I'm going to say 73%.
So I'm actually going to check Kingdom of the Crystal Skull because I don't know what its Rotten Tomatoes is. I've never looked at all the movies together like that. But you said how much? What was it you guessed?
So I guessed 62 for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I said 73, I believe, for Dial of Destiny.
I think you would be closer if you swapped them, because Dial of Destiny is 68%, and Crystal Skull is 77%, which is certified fresh. Funny enough, and Crystal Skull has 309 reviews, so that kind of tells you how much things have changed.
Yeah.
So yeah, but no, Dial of Destiny is 68%, and it did climb a bit. I think it was around it was between 60 and 66 for a while, and then it perked up a bit, perked down a bit. It's been kind of all over the map. What about the audience score, though? We have 2,500 plus verified ratings.
I don't know. I feel like audiences are probably going to be more receptive to this film than they were for Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Like you said, I mean, it's kind of easy to forget that Kingdom of the Crystal Skull had pretty good reviews going into it.
It did.
And then, it kind of had the prequel effect where, like, critics initially were kind of like, yeah, it was okay. And then, over time, the fans were just, like, seething with anger, being like, that was not okay.
Yeah, I don't know what its audience score might have been, Crystal Skull, back in 2008, but, like, now it's, like, 53%, which I think, to what you're saying.
Yeah. So I thought that effect might have happened more, I guess, with Kingdom of Crystal Skull, considering how much I hear about people hating that movie. But I guess it's still pretty high. It's still like the original consensus there. But as far as the audience goes, I'm going to say 78%.
You're off by 10. It's actually 88%.
88%. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty high.
I feel like these...
I think it makes sense. I think it's a crowd pleaser. Sure. And I think that opening weekend of people who wanted to go see it did go see it and got a lot of what they wanted. And I think it's probably still a mixed response. Or I'm sure like a lot of people were like me. It's like, yeah, there's some stuff I don't like, but I got some classic indie thrills, so I'm good to go.
Sure. I feel like I've been lowballing these scores of late.
A little bit.
Yeah.
It's a hat. It's clouding your judgment. Okay, cinema score. What do you think?
Well, like you said, I think audiences probably enjoy this. I don't know if it's going to be like A level enjoy, but I feel like they're going to be satisfied. Maybe some qualms, but still with it. So I say, I don't know. I feel like A- is too high. B+ seems a little low, but I feel like B+ is closer than A-. So I'm going to say B+.
They're going to say like B++.
B++, yeah.
You got the Simba score. B+ is correct. That's funny. Yeah, I would have been between a B and a B+, and that would have been a tough one for me. But you made the right call. And then we'll finish out with Letterboxd. We have 94,000 watches on here. That's not a ton for a movie ostensibly this big, especially among people who on Letterboxd, I'm sure, watch a lot of older movies. So, what do you think the average rating is so far?
I'm gonna say 3.2.
So close. Just like last week, you're only off by 0.1. That's 3.1. I'm not even going to make you guess because I'm sure you would guess lower. That would make sense, right? Yeah, 3.1. So yeah, lots of 3-star ratings. I mean, I'm looking at my mutuals. I'm seeing some 3.5s. I'm not seeing a lot of 4s. Friend of the show, Charlie Ridgely, gave it 3.5. Clint Worthington, friend of the show, gave it 2.5. Ryan Oliver gave it 2.5. Chris Vangelista, 2.5. So really, I'm seeing more 2.5s than I am 3s right now. But then Aaron Dicer gave it 4. So it's a little bit all over the place. Man of the Jedi gave it 3. So yeah, definitely one of those movies where I think that people are kind of giving it a pass. And we'll see if that holds up over the years. If people will reevaluate the movie either more negatively or more positively, similar to, I guess, to what you're saying, like King of the Crystal Skull. I wasn't like super online in 2008, but I remember in the early 2010s, really around the time like when those like Red Plinkett reviews of like the prequels were coming out, and I started getting more into like the Reddit stuff and seeing like, wow, yeah, people really hate certain movies, and particularly Crystal Skull. I thought I was kind of not alone on not liking that movie, but I do remember people being like, that was good, you know, and kind of like not over the moon or anything, but I do remember like I was kind of like the weird ones who was just like, oh, I didn't like that movie. Maybe I'm just not an Indiana Jones fan like the rest of you.
No, I mean, well, I did find it funny that you said Red Plinkett as opposed to Red Letter Media or
Red Letter Media, Red Plinkett. So we didn't talk about Ruby Gillman Teenage Kraken this week, but that is out in theaters. Also, Nimona is on Netflix, which I'd like to go see that. Otherwise, the only other major release we have coming up here that I see, we do have Insidious: The Red Door. They're not even screening it for critics. I'm not going to watch it. But Mike Overholtz is going to be seeing it this week, so I'm going to be asking him what's going on there. But Joyride, that's the big movie. My review of that movie is coming out today. And I think Joyride is the big release. Definitely want to talk about that. I'm still waiting for Will Ashton to watch Past Lives. That is certainly, you know, one of the ones that I was like, man, if we can do a bonus to that, we're running out of time, I think, in terms of the listeners' patience, but we'll do what we can. So
yeah, what is our review next week?
I think Joyride, right?
If that's what you want, yeah, I can do it.
Yeah, I mean, what else would be? Joyride's going to be is definitely going to be the big movie of the weekend. It's going to be in theaters on Friday, and it's looking like it might make some money.
I mean, I definitely think Insidious is going to make more money, but
you think so?
Oh, almost certainly, yeah. I mean, horror movies tend to do better right now than comedies. I mean, it's just... I
guess so, but I feel like Joyride has, it has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes right now, spoiling the Rotten Tomatoes game, but that's going to change, to be clear. But I think that I don't know, I think we've seen movies like this, like we've seen movies like Girls Trip, for example, you know, like a summertime, female-focused comedy, R-rated comedy, good marketing, good marks from critics, that kind of thing, I think can do well, but it is a question mark because we live in a weird time. So
I don't know. I just feel like these days studio comedies, whether they get good reviews or not, tend to do middling to bad business. Like, I mean, we just saw, you know, No Hard Feelings, like doing Bros. No Hard Feelings is doing like okay. You know, Booksmart. You know, like these movies, like I don't know. It's not a certainty that I feel like, oh, if it got good reviews, it's going to be a hit. But Girls Trip is a good comparison. I think the
difference, because Joyride, like Girls Trip, is actually like has a very, very funny trailer, and I think Booksmart did have a funny trailer, and that one did fine. I think like it made money, but I think Joyride just has like it has a more interesting setup, and I know a lot of people are like, well, you know, it could be the next Crazy Rich Asians in terms of like turning out a demographic that doesn't usually go to theaters to watch these movies because they're like, you know. These movies aren't usually built to appeal to them, but hey, we'll find out pretty soon. I hope you like Joyride. I don't know if it's exactly your kind of thing, but I hope that you have a fun theater experience with it, because it is fun to watch this movie with a theater that's excited to watch it, because people are going to laugh a lot and like there's energy to it, even if you know not every joke lands for everybody, right?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I got to push back on is I do not think those trailers look good. I know
I'm talking about like to the normal population.
I have seen the trailers for that movie in multiple audiences, and I cannot remember a single time I've seen an audience member laugh at the trailer.
It must be a Pittsburgh thing, because I genuinely have seen the complete opposite. Yeah, maybe it's more of a California vibe. Who knows?
Maybe. I don't know. I'm just saying I want the movie to be good. Obviously, I want it to be. I mean, you love it. You've seen it twice already. I want to have that experience because I feel like I haven't seen a studio comedy in a while that I've just like really fallen for. So I'm hoping for the best, but yeah, I just will say that the ads I've seen aren't doing it for me, but maybe they'll give me a bigger surprise next week.
The other notable miss for us that we haven't covered is The Blackening. We've got a couple notices. Yeah, I've heard from some folks being like, yeah, I just haven't watched that movie or talked about it. What's going on? Right. It's been in theaters. I mean, it came out at the worst time. I mean, it just came out when so much other stuff was hitting, and I genuinely I really want to watch it. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I want to see it. Yeah, I heard it's good.
But for now, That'll do it for this week's episode of Cinemaholics. Don't forget to connect with us on the social medias. We aren't really going to be doing anything with the Twitter anymore because Twitter's just too broken. But we do have Instagram. So if you want to connect with us, find the latest episodes, we have our Instagram account up. We also have a Discord server, which you can find in the links of the show notes. Hang out with us there. You'll also find new episodes and all that good stuff. And you can chat with us a little bit more in a fun format. So until then, though, from the Internet California, I'm John Negroni.
And for the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Washington.
See you next time.